All right, let's just dive right in. Gold had an absolutely insane year in 2025, didn't it? Just record-shattering. So the big question on everyone's mind is, what on earth happens next? That's what we're going to unpack today. The forecasts, the scenarios, the whole picture for 2026.
And when I say insane, I really mean it. We are talking about a return of over 60%. Just let that sink in for a second. The World Gold Council confirmed it. You have to go back decades to find a year that even comes close to that. Just a phenomenal, phenomenal performance.
So you see a number like that, and you have to wonder, right, is that it? Was that the big fireworks show, and now it's all over? Or is there still some fuel left in that rocket? Okay, so before we can even start to talk about 2026, we've got to look back. We really need to get our heads around just how massive 2025 truly was for gold. And look, this wasn't just about one lucky spike. We're talking about gold hitting over 50, that's 50 all-time highs. It was just this relentless, steady climb, day after day, week after week. Seriously, one of the strongest years for gold since the 1970s.
So the big question is, why? What was pushing it so high? Well, it wasn't just one single thing. It was more like a perfect storm, where a few really powerful forces all came together at the exact same time. And you can pretty much break it all down into three big buckets. First, you had the general economic conditions, what was happening with growth and interest rates. Then you had all this global uncertainty swirling around. And the third piece, a really big one, was what the major players like the world central banks were doing.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Check this out. The World Gold Council has this model that breaks down why the price moved. And what it shows for 2025 is something you honestly don't see very often, a really balanced mix of factors. This wasn't a rally that relied on just one thing to keep it going. I mean, just look at this breakdown. You've got risk and uncertainty playing a huge part. Then you have opportunity cost. Think a weaker dollar, right there with it. And then you've got pure price momentum and economic factors all chipping in. It was like an engine firing perfectly on all cylinders. Everything was working together. Okay, so that's the story of 2025. A monster year, no doubt. Now, let's pivot and look forward. Where does gold go from here? Well, analysts have basically laid out a few possible futures, a few very different paths it could take. And here's a great visual of that. This research maps out 4 potential trajectories. And as you can see, they are worlds apart. We're talking everything from a pretty nasty drop all the way to another massive bull run, each with its own likelihood. So what's the deciding factor here? It really all comes down to the economy. Gold's performance is basically a mirror image of how confident everyone is feeling. If the economy looks shaky and people are scared, gold tends to do really well. If the economy is booming and everyone's optimistic, gold, not so much. And the potential outcomes here are huge, ranging from a 20% drop to a 30% surge. Let's just look at the two extremes here to make it super clear. On one end, you've got what they call the doom loop. Basically, the global economy tanks, central banks start slashing interest rates, and investors panic and run for the safety of gold. On the complete opposite end, you have the reflation return. Here, the economy comes roaring back to life, rates might even go up, and investors feel confident enough to dump gold and buy stocks instead. But wait, it's not quite that simple. It's not just about those big economic scenarios. There are a couple of wild cards in the deck that could totally change the game. The first one is a biggie, central banks. They have been on an unprecedented buying spree lately, and some folks think this is way more than just a short-term trend. As this quote says, it could be the beginning of a major, long-term pivot in global monetary power. That is a huge statement. So, why the shopping spree? Well, a big part of it is about diversifying away from the US dollar. After Russia's dollar reserves were frozen back in 2022, a lot of countries got a serious wake-up call. They're looking for an asset that's not tied to one country's politics, something that can't be weaponized. And gold is the classic answer. And here's the thing. This trend could have a long way to run. If you look at this chart, you'll see that a lot of emerging markets still hold way less gold than developed nations do. There's a big gap to fill, which suggests this demand from central banks isn't going away anytime soon. All right, the second wild card is a little more under the radar. It has to do with what regular people are doing with their gold, especially in a massive market like India. Now, this is pretty fascinating. Instead of selling their jewelry when they need money, more and more people are using it to get loans. Now, that's actually good for the price because it keeps that gold locked up and off the market. But there's a catch. If the economy takes a nosedive, all those people could be forced to sell at once, and that would flood the market with supply, potentially sending prices tumbling.
Okay, so we've looked at the scenarios, we've looked at the wild cards. What's the big takeaway here? What does all this tell us about gold's role in the world today?
You know, the real story here isn't about trying to guess the exact price of gold in 2026. The consensus is much bigger than that. It's that no matter which of those scenarios happens, gold's job as a portfolio stabilizer, as a source of stability, is more important than it's been in a long, long time. In other words, gold is just doing what it has always done. It's stepping back into its classic role as a safe haven asset. You know, the place you run to when everything else feels like it's falling apart. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. In this crazy, fast-changing world, with all the new tech and the geopolitical drama, is it possible that gold's oldest, most basic role is actually